I'm very, very glad to be here tonight. I've been looking forward to my Boston events for a long time, and I am recovering from a cold, and that the last stage apparently is a lovely form of laryngitis. So I will do the best I can, and I know they have a wonderful sound system here, so I'm hoping that you will be able to hear me. I'd like to begin by reading, I think it's Episcopal Place Church, such as Trinity, is a wonderful place to read wicked poems. And I want to read a very brief poem by the wicked poet Philip Larkin. Where can we live but days? Solving that question brings the priest and the doctor in their long coats running over the fields. That's the poem. Where can we live but days? That is what we are given, that's what we have. And we all need a lot of people to help us figure out how to live those days well, how to shape a life that matters. And basically, for the humanities program at Northeastern, I was really asked to talk partly about what a liberal education can mean in helping us live a life that matters, helping us get through all those days. And you know, I have a BA from Bennington, which doesn't really count for very much in Boston. You have way too many PhDs running around here. And I think partly living for 25 years on the Great Plains, where in a very small town, where you quickly realize that there were some very, very intelligent people who had very little education, and also the difference between ignorance and intellect, and people who were willing to read. And it left me feeling that I think in America, if we could just produce more high school graduates who just want to keep reading their whole lives, the whole country, the whole world would be so much a better place. The desire for lifelong learning is often there and often isn't really answered, and reality TV does not count. So I want to talk tonight about a liberal arts education, and I'm hoping to do it in the broadest sense, looking at it as a lifelong endeavor. Because college itself is such a luxury, but not in the way we might think. I know it's expensive, and families sacrifice to send their children to college. I myself was supported both in high school and college by loans and scholarships and on-campus jobs. I have nieces in their 30s who are still paying off their college and grad school debts. And this all is very much in the news, as it should be. This is a serious matter for our country to consider what we're doing here and what kind of education we want people to have. And I know I serve on the Board of Trustees at St. John's Abbey University in Minnesota, and I know it's these questions of tuition and debt are very much on our minds. But I think what I have come to believe is that the true luxury that an education can provide is time. College is this time set apart. And of course, students find that hard to believe because they're often juggling deadlines, preparing for exams and meetings. That's the day-to-day reality of a college life, I guess, for both the faculty and the students. But if we step back a bit and look at a larger picture, I think that we can see that college is like no other time in our lives, because useless activities such as reading, study, discussing, and debating are respected there. Time is set aside for them. This quality time is increasingly hard to come by in our frantically busy workaday world. Time, quiet time, time to think, time to grow. To borrow a spiritual term, I think our education time, college included, is a time of formation, a period when we begin to shape the rest of our lives. So it's good to take all the time we need to learn and question, to explore our avocations and vocations, to start to build a life that matters. Americans tend to be very pragmatic. Many are tempted to regard college as training ground for a well-training career. Parents begin building a college fund for their infant children, hoping that that child will one day find a better job, have a good income. But I think at its best, our education is so much more than that. It's not just a preparation for a job, but for life. It's not meant to help us discover, it will help us discover what we want to do, but really it's who we want to become. At best, I think college can instill in us that desire for lifelong learning. I believe high school can too. No matter how old we are, we can sign up for a class, join a reading group, and learn things that will enhance our life, our love for life. I was so happy with my parents when they turned 80 and moved into a senior living place. They took Tai Chi for the first time. They began to make new friends at a time when many people, they're losing their older friends. Well, life is a gift, and our own life's journey is not just about us, but about our developing talents and interests so that our lives become gifts for others. That's a tall order, but I think, unlikely as it seems, if we use whatever education we have to read everything we can get our hands on, to plunge into the literature of history and the sciences, to develop an appreciation of the strange and beautiful languages of poetry and mathematics, we will find that our world and our life in it never ceases to be interesting, and sometimes it's even amazing. We can develop values and insights that will help us resist the crass temptations of a culture that often seems to value only consumption and celebrity. If you don't know how bad it is, I suggest that you take in maybe 15 minutes of Jersey Shore, and you will be convinced. I found an interesting book called Amusing Ourselves to Death that had this marvelous paragraph that I just am sticking in this essay. I'm not sure how it fits, but I think it does, talking about the culture that we're in and what it is encouraging us to do, not necessarily to build a life that matters, but to buy more and maybe not even think at all. This is from Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, talking about George Orwell and Aldous Huxley's visions, dystopic visions of the future. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we would become a trivial culture. That made me want to go back and reread Huxley, because he is describing the world I know. So how does an education, a broad liberal education, help us here? I think it can help us avoid the addictions that plague so many. Why numb ourselves with drugs or alcohol, the video lottery, or the shopping mall when the world is so fascinating? Why does everything in the universe spin? Why, in a classroom, does the pluralistic ignorance effect often take hold, so that the people who have questions think, well, it's just me, and no one dares raise a hand. I owe the name for that syndrome to my niece, who was an industrial psychologist, the pluralistic ignorance effect. Why are there more life forms at the edges of any ecosystem than in the middle? How does a brisk walk stimulate both mind and body? The poet Donald Hall has written in an essay, he believes that walking itself is the origin of poetry, that as you walk along, there's a rhythm that your body produces, the movement of arms and legs, and if you're trying to remember words, they come to you. I've certainly composed poems that way. Apparently that's how Wallace Stevens compared his poems, walking back and forth to his job as an insurance executive in Hartford. But walking, how does it stimulate? Why would that happen? Stimulate both our minds and our bodies. How is it that one drop of a newborn baby's blood can reveal more than 30 treatable genetic defects and much more? How does the gene ASPP2 trigger a protein that activates biological pathways that tell cancer cells to die? Well, one answer in poetic terms to all of these questions that are out there in the world before us, one answer is from Psalm 139, telling us that we and the world are wondrously made. Wonder, hard to come by in our workaday life. But literature, all that stuff we had to read in school, is one response to that wonder. It tells our story and always has. Long before people had paper and writing implements, they were telling stories, even sagas, epics, and making histories. Both our holy scriptures and our secular literature endures for centuries, not because someone tells us that it's great, but because when we most need it, it is there for us. When we need to stir hope out of the ashes and be reminded that evil does not have the last word, we can look to the Lord of the Rings trilogy or Harry Potter. Both stories admit that evil has an awful strength and does real damage, but is not invincible. It always contains within it an essential weakness and fails in the presence of what is truly good. Not long ago, a novel by Ian McEwan, Atonement, became my companion on a long day of about 14 hours of air travel. The writing was so vivid, especially his depiction of children, that I felt I was learning new things about my own childhood. That horrid little girl who invents a story she thinks is true, but is not. Another happy literary discovery I made by sheer accident is a little novel called Sorry, the English word sorry by Gail Jones, one of the best depictions of Australia and Aboriginal white relations that I have ever read. And it's really just the story about one little girl and her family, but it's so much larger than that. I recently, one of my favorite books of all time is Wole Soyinka's Ake, The Years of Childhood, a memoir of his own childhood in Nigeria that I read years ago, and I was happy to read, recently finished reading that lovely woman Adiche's, a book of short stories, That Thing Around Your Neck, a young generation of Nigerian writers, and I was very happy to see that she was part of the Northeastern program. All of these books are there really to help us enlarge our own world and look at our own lives in a new way. I think in some ways our education, at its best, it's meant to be like opening a book that opens the world for us. It certainly reminds us that storytelling is no small part of what makes us human. Someone once called us human beings, hairy storytelling bipeds. And I think that there's some real truth to that. Not long ago, I had the privilege of being one of the readers for a book of stories and memoirs and poems written by military personnel and their family. Growing up as a Navy brat in Hawaii, I felt very, very close to that. Although my father was a Navy musician, and he always called that the zoo entrance to the military. A little less discipline, sometimes a lot less discipline than you might expect. But I was so happy to see this anthology. I found out probably more than I wanted to know about what it's like to be a combat medic. This was from Iraq. I read a Jewish soldier's account of lighting a menorah candle in one of Saddam Hussein's former palaces. One soldier was struck by the long history of the land where he'd been stationed and wrote to his children, "The Romans fought here. One of the Egyptian pharaohs fought here, and now I'm fighting here." An Air Force pilot consulted not only her flight plans, but the maps in her Bible, realizing that the land that she was flying over was one that she had in fact read about all her life. The Ur of the Chaldeans, the birthplace of Abraham, who of course is regarded as the father of all three religions of the book, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Whatever you think about war or American foreign policy, I think those stories are valuable, and I was so glad to find them being told. And I hope to demonstrate by sharing these stories, probably something you really do know, but literature doesn't just reside in textbooks, and I think that's probably one of the greatest failings of American education, is to contain literature in textbooks. And having worked for many years as an artist in schools and elementary schools, I often found that when poets like Emily Dickinson or Walt Whitman were in those books, they were usually their very worst poems. And then there were people who wrote only for children's textbooks who were some of the worst writers I've ever read. I mean, it was so distressing to see this, and I think it's probably still going on. Literature doesn't reside in textbooks. It's not there so you can accumulate facts or answer questions on a quiz. Writers really don't bother with the struggle of writing in order to torment students or bore them or help them get an A. Literature exists to help people gain wisdom and live life to the fullest. Even a memoir, which is often the story of one person's life, can help you better understand your own story. I actually recently developed a course. I did one online course for the Provincetown Fine Arts Center. I was in Hawaii, and I think one of my students was on East Coast time and one was in Central time. But it was a course called Taking the Me Out of Memoir that grew out of being very distressed at all the narcissism and self-absorption I was finding in manuscripts that I was reading. And we talked today with some of my students about memoirs that are about something. I mean, Dakota really is about the farm crisis and life on the Great Plains. Acedia really is about Acedia. Lauren Winter's written some books that really they're about her. She's in the book, but they're about bigger subjects. And I think that's a very important thing. That's much more appealing. The 18th century literary giant and wit Samuel Johnson said, "The purpose of literature is to help the reader better to enjoy life and to endure it." A contemporary writer, Sue Monk Kidd, puts it another way: you can survive anything if you can tell a story about it. And I think one of the purposes of any education, I think, is to give us the confidence that we have a story and we can tell it. So I think if we're fortunate enough to have good teachers, good mentors in our lives, whether they're high school teachers or college professors, They will help us understand that literature lives not on the page, but in the human heart. And then the paths we take after our formal education ends. Some people right after college or grad school, they settle into a career they've always dreamed of and find that it leaves them feeling empty inside. Maybe they're so driven to succeed that they forget to have a life outside of work. One of my favorite memories of, quite a while ago now, with my sister-in-law, who had a wonderful dual career. She is an Episcopal priest, but her day job was as a stockbroker and financial planner for Smith Barney. And she would wear shirts to work that she could slip a collar in and make a prison visit or a hospital visit during lunch hour. She had been an Episcopal nun early on in her life, when she was very young, at the Community of the Holy Spirit in New York. And I think she said, she would say things like, I don't see how I think all stockbrokers should live for at least a year of a novitiate in a vow of poverty. They would understand what money means. And then one day she came home and threw her briefcase on the floor and immediately started playing with her two young daughters, who were maybe 6 and 3. Just playing with them on the floor, just so happy to be. She's really leaving work behind, and she said, I don't understand how stockbrokers without small children do it. Total reversal of the usual, how can you be a parent? How can you do the total reversal? And then she said, well, I know how they do it. They go to the bars and have a couple of scotches and then go home, but that was not the path she wanted to follow. Often people discover that having children in itself will alter their idea of what gives life meaning. Often you do find young people who've either had no religion in their lives or they've had a very troubled relationship with churches or synagogues or whatever. Once they have children, they say, wait a minute, I want them to know these Bible stories. I want them to have something to grow up with. Often, and we've certainly seen lots of evidence of this in recent years, people are forced into drastic changes of plan as booms and busts work their way through our economy. And all of us can be sure that in our lives, unwelcome events will seize us by the throat. Health problems, the death of loved ones, a divorce, the loss of a job. Any one of these events can be an earthquake, leaving us unsure of the very ground we stand on. And even if we've managed to avoid the major disasters, in midlife, we often find ourselves hitting a dry spell when what sustained you for years no longer works. That's where the lifelong learning can come in. You can find something that will work. Have the faith to explore a bit, go to the library, whatever it takes, find something that will work. I want to share with you, though, one of the wonderful remarks on probably the best description of midlife I ever found when I was working on Acedia. In the journals of Ionesco, the playwright, he said, I started out as a butterfly and am slowly turning into a caterpillar. Yes. I almost got kicked out of the library. I started laughing so hard. I said, I know what he means. And then there's another wonderful thing, an opening up that happens to people in midlife, and even after they've retired, when they're a little older. Maybe they've spent their life in a job that was okay, it gave them an income, but they might seek out new territory. A corporate attorney might turn to teaching disadvantaged young people or volunteer for the Peace Corps. An insurance executive might become a healthcare advocate or teach computer skills or English as a second language to immigrants. And one very hard truth is that even after we've developed our gifts and our talents, in old age we are often asked to give them up. I spent a lot of time in recent years, my parents in their senior living place, because it was within walking distance of my apartment, which was one of the reasons I chose to live there. I saw an elderly man confined to his bed who had been a champion swimmer in his youth. I witnessed my father, a professional musician, have to give up the cello he had played for well over 62 years. He commented when it was crated up and being taken away, "I've known that cello longer than I've known your mother." I've seen fiercely independent people like my father learn to accept help from others. Other people I've seen not accept that help and lash out using bitterness and rage to keep them going. Well, old age may seem like a long way off to some of you, and the world will be drastically different when you reach it. Today's technology, all the marvels that we think are so great will seem primitive. Some of us here may even be living on a space station. But each of us will still face that ancient question of how to give our life meaning. Why live if it's only to die? Why become a champion swimmer if I have to give it up in the end? Why open doors if one day they will close behind me? Well, I think we're guided to the answer by the life we've lived, by the books we've read, the symphonies we've heard or maybe composed. Everything gets into this pot, and I think when we need it, it is there for us. We're meant to shape meaningful lives, and we perform this enormous task by simply living each day. As Philip Larkin would say, days are all we have. So we do those necessary daily tasks, but we also focus on a larger picture, a life that matters. I think ultimately it's others who will tell us how we have done. I love to think of the people in my own life, and surely you have a list of your cloud of witnesses, people in your own life who have blessed and encouraged you, the people whose lives, just the way they were living their life, has helped you to find the meaning in their own. And I'm always fascinated when I find someone who is passionate, truly passionate about what it is they're doing. It can be driving a cab. I once found a cab driver in Boston who loved his work so much it almost made me want to take the driving test to be a cab driver. I mean, he was so into people and just a very interesting fellow. Found another cab driver in Honolulu whose favorite book is Kafka on the Shore. Somehow we came up talking about books, and so now he gets some of the books after I've read them. Because Kafka on the Shore, that's too much even for me. And here's a cab driver who says that's his favorite book. He loves it. He's a Jewish immigrant from Iran. So maybe Kafka on the Shore makes a sense to him that it doesn't make to me. But people, no matter what they are doing, teaching, hairdressing, even a drugstore clerk in Honolulu has a very, very tiny downtown, and where the financial and legal businesses are located. And there's a drugstore right in the center of this. It has this woman. If you get there early enough in the morning, you can get a hibiscus bud from her garden. She has a garden like many people in Honolulu where it rains every day, this beautiful garden. She'll hand you a hibiscus flower as you or blossom. They're still sort of furled there. She'll hand you this flower and say, "God bless you, enjoy your day." And I know that even the atheists and all the many Buddhists in Honolulu are very happy to see her and start their day with her. It's a blessing, no mistaking that, from a drugstore clerk, someone who knows how to live her life. And I guess the whole point of shaping a life that has meaning is to become that kind of person ourselves. And I really think that is our education's true aim. And no matter what path we take to get there, if we're conscious of that as the aim of education, not just career, not just job, not just money, I think we will get there, and others will recognize it and appreciate it, and we will become gifts for others. I want to close my part of this program by reading some more poems. And it's partly, I want to read some poems by people who have other jobs. Laura Gilpin is a poet. There's an older poet with that name, but she's someone my age. She became a nurse. I remember being so many people were going to grad school and writing, and I was sort of not knowing what I wanted to do. I ended up going to Western South Dakota. But Laura became a nurse, and I thought, finally, someone's doing something really practical, really meaningful, in a way that I've always admired it. And then years later, I saw this beautiful poem in poetry. And I think this shows what an education means, or what it can mean in shaping a life. Laura Gilpin's The Bath. I stand here bathing her while she sleeps in a far place beyond my reaching. I bathe her as I have been taught to do, first the eyes, then the forehead, the face, the neck. And as I work, I talk to her in case she hears me, believing that hearing is the last to go. I tell her I don't know why, but I tell her the time, the day, the season, what the weather is doing, lifting each arm to wash and dry it, laying it down again at her side, then the chest, the abdomen, each leg. She offers no resistance except that of gravity, the earth pulling her down while I lift, as though something between us is being weighed. Then I turn her to wash her back, talking to her about what seems to matter in this life, though I make no promises. Only this morning, the promise of spring was in the air, and I tell her that. I kind of hate reading poems in such a broken voice, but that's what you get. And there's another poet I've never met, but I admire greatly, a man who did something very, very practical. He actually became an MD, a doctor. And Rafael Campo, I believe he teaches here in maybe at Harvard, across the river. But this is a series of poems about where he's looking at his medical practice, his medical life, but also saying some very important things to all of us about life and death. This is his poem, The Very Self. Another end-stage cancer patient came for hospice placement yesterday. It seemed as though he'd lived forever in the same misshapen body, starving for a name to give each newfound bone. It seemed as though he'd run until his muscles were consumed, until his gnawing hunger had subsumed in it his very self. I need to know his vital signs. I want to know his fate. I need to hold his heart, the stone beneath the endless bone-strewn desert, while I squeeze for just one drop of blood. More dying waits downstairs for me. I almost hear their groans. Same hunger, bones, same face we all consumed. As I examine them, I find the tomb toward which they lead. I know it is my own. I think that quality of being able to identify with others and the other is a big part of what an education is meant to do, how it's meant to help us shape a life. And I'm going to close with two poems, one of mine and one of my husband's. I actually like his better, but a lot better, in fact. But This came about because my husband was a lyric poet. His first book was UMass Press. He won the Juniper Prize after about 23 publishers had rejected the book. Typical poet story. And he had a solid Jesuit education in the classics, all of this. But as he got older, he got really fascinated by higher mathematics, which kind of horrified me. And because I had math anxiety dating back to about third grade when we did multiplication, and the numbers got way too big and I couldn't control them. And then I have another poem I won't read, but about this, a teacher once told me, well, 2 + 2 is always 4, and I think that's really boring. If that's the case, why would I care about math? My brother, who has some degrees in math, said, that's wrong. It's only 4 and set 10. And I said, well, no one told me that in Central Illinois in 1955. I mean, they weren't ready for that. And if someone had told me that 2 and 2 is not always 4, I might have had a chance to become interested. And I really regret that, because my husband got an interest in higher mathematics. And when I would wake up in the morning, he was a night person, and so I would find lyric poems sitting on the computer printer, and sometimes it was binary code, which really freaks me out, zeros and ones. But he would talk about the higher numbers and the beauty of the higher numbers, the beauty of mathematics. He compared it to climbing in an ice field. And I said, well, I found my ice field in third grade, impassable cliffs. But we started to have these debates and arguments about math, and at one point I said, I think what you mean by higher numbers and what I mean by angels might be the same. Maybe we'll sort of meet around one day and we'll find in heaven or wherever that the higher numbers and angels are really the same, and we'll all be happy together. But there are 2 quotes. I'll read my poem first, and it's called Naming the Living God. And there are 2 quotes that David gave me from some of the science that he'd been reading, from Einstein and from Bernard Riemann. Naming the living God. The special theory came to me, Einstein said, as shifting forms of light. Riemann once remarked, I did not invent those pairs of differential equations. I found them in the world where God had hidden them. Natural numbers stand firm, granite laced with ice. Negative numbers roam, lions about to pounce. All things change when you measure them. You might as well sing. The sound of your voice joining the others like waters overflowing, the name of the living God. And David's poem is called David Dwyer was his name, The Higher Arithmetic. And there's reference to real mathematics here, the halting problem, and that's all I know about it. The name is the halting problem. And there really are inaccessible cardinals in math. Catholics love to hear that. But this is true. The Higher Arithmetic by David Dwyer. In heaven, I do not know that there are angels, but I know there are numbers there and light. Arithmetic and heaven are both uncountably full of light. Inaccessible cardinals there will lord it over mere infinities. The naturals will dance among the reals. Apart from numbers, how little we know. There is no largest prime. The halting problem is formally undecidable. Every subset of a well-ordered set is well-ordered itself, and so on. Such things are true, even easy to prove. Are there uncountably more, unknowably other true things about the world? I had to go away, a woman I love, and this is true, too, put an icon of an archangel into the glove compartment of my car. I haven't looked, but I know it is there, as I know there is no largest prime. Raphael, she said, his numberless wings cloak all of us, poor travelers who do not know, but are not lost. The angel, she said, of happy meetings, after all. So thank you.